Chosen one, stay with me, because the atmosphere around you has shifted into a realm of deep intimidation for those who cannot control you. The fear you sense from others is not a reflection of your character, but a confession of their own weakness. The reality is that they are frightened of your sovereign power. They labeled it as sorcery, but these are gifts from the Most High. You are winning because your source is celestial, not terrestrial. There's a neighborhood. Every neighborhood has one house. You already know the one. It is the house at the end of the road that gets legends built around it. Nobody really knows what happens inside, so people fill the silence with imagination. Kids dare each other to go press the bell. Neighbors cross the street rather than walk past it. The legend gets passed down to younger people, like sacred warning. And the whole time, the person inside that house is simply living their life. That house is you. It has always been you. Not because you are haunted, not because anything is fundamentally wrong. It is because the frequency you operate on does not match the frequency of the neighborhood around you. You refuse to perform, you refuse to shrink, and you refuse to make yourself legible to people who were never meant to understand you in the first place. When something cannot be predicted, when something just keeps existing in total sovereign calm regardless of what gets thrown at it, people do not respond with curiosity, they respond with noise. The first noise was subtle. You keep to yourself too much. There is something a little cold about you, a little off, nothing dramatic, just a low hum of framing that positioned you as slightly outside, slightly other than what the group required. You felt every bit of it. You know exactly what that specific impossible to prove, impossible to ignore sense of being held at arm's length feels like. You felt it in the group plans made without your name, in the conversations that went quiet the moment you arrived, and in the invitation that was technically standing but never quite warm. And you asked the question every chosen soul eventually asks in the dark, what is wrong with me? Nothing. Nothing was ever wrong with you, but you did not know that yet. And the people running the campaign against you were counting on your not knowing it, because as long as you were searching yourself for the defect, cataloging your own flaws, trying to figure out what needed to change, you were not asking the more accurate and devastating question, what is wrong with this situation? Here is the first thing I need you to hold. The reason you were kept on the outside was not because you were a threat to anyone personally. It was because you were a mirror. And mirrors are devastating to people who have built an entire identity on a reflection that is not true. Remember the mirror. We are coming back to it. The gifts that made you different, your perception, your depth, your sovereign frequency, did not turn off when the exclusion started. They went quiet. They went underground. They waited. And while they waited, they grew stronger. Here is something that was never meant to be named for you. You have always operated on two levels at the same time. There is the visible level, what you say, what you do, how you present yourself to the world. And then there is the level underneath all of that. It is the level that runs without your permission. It travels ahead of you before you even open your mouth. Certain people feel it before a single word gets exchanged between you. That second level is your sovereign signal. It has been broadcasting your true nature, your entire life, with or without your awareness of it. Think about the times a complete stranger opened up to you about something they said they had never told anyone else. Think about the times someone treated you with a particular deference they could not explain. Think about the way certain people moved toward you, not because of anything you said or did, but because something in your presence reached their instincts before their rational mind could raise an objection. You probably dismissed those moments. You probably called them coincidence. They were not coincidence. They were your frequency making contact with something genuine in another person before logic could interfere. That is a gift, and it is one of the exact gifts that got labeled sorcery. Here is what that signal does to a person who is performing a spiritual identity rather than living one. When your sovereign frequency moves through a space, it does not ask for permission, and it does not calibrate itself to what is socially comfortable. It simply tells the truth about resonance. It reveals who is operating from a genuine place and who is operating from a constructed one. Genuine people experience it as warmth. Performing people experience it as exposure. And for someone who has spent years building a performance as their entire identity, that exposure is not discomfort. It is an existential threat. The performing circle did not label your gifts sorcery because it believed you were evil. It labeled them sorcery because it had no other language for something that kept seeing through the performance without even trying. You were not casting anything. You were not sending anything. You were simply being fully present in what you are. And that presence alone was doing something the performance could not survive. That quality, real, unperformable, sovereign presence is what made you the haunted house at the end of the road. Not malice, not darkness, presence. And you carried it so naturally that you did not even know you were doing it. You still are. If this touched your heart and mind, hype this video so more chosen ones can receive this message. At some point, you found a community, or it found you. It was a circle of people who spoke your language, or something close enough to it that the difference was not immediately detectable. The vocabulary sounded right. The promise of belonging was real enough to feel. The intoxicating sensation of finally being around people who seemed to understand what you were carrying was enough to draw you in. You moved toward it. Of course you did. You had been on the outside of things for long enough. But here is the foreshadow that the entire arc turns on. A group that performs spiritual gifts is not the same as a group that actually possesses them. A circle gathered around the idea of healing is not the same as a place where genuine healing happens. And a sophisticated enough performance surrounded by enough social reinforcement can look indistinguishable from the real thing until the real thing walks in. That is exactly what happened. You arrived carrying the actual frequency the circle had been imitating. You showed up with genuine gifts the circle had been performing. Something shifted, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Your discernment was already running in the background, registering the gap, sending you quiet signals that things were not quite what they appeared. You tried to override it. You gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself you were being too critical, too guarded. You wanted to belong, and that is deeply human, so you stayed longer than your own signal was recommending. In those early days, your presence was genuinely wanted. Genuine light is attractive, especially to people who are performing it, because proximity to the real thing creates the temporary sensation of authenticity. You made the circle feel more real. Your presence elevated the energy in the space. And for a while, that arrangement held a quiet, uneasy balance. Balance always breaks, and what breaks it is almost always the moment the real thing gets too bright for the performance to survive alongside it. The moment came. You know exactly which one it was. Maybe it was a question nobody was supposed to ask. Maybe it was something you perceived that you were not supposed to perceive. Maybe it was simply the accumulated weight of being fully yourself in a space that needed you to be something smaller. But there was a moment where the balance cracked, the energy shifted, and you felt bone deep and undeniable that something had turned against you, and then came the accusation. Spoken or unspoken, direct or passed through the rumor system with perfect deniability, you betrayed us. Let that sentence be decoded, because it is the most revealing thing ever said about you. You did not steal from anyone. You did not harm anyone. What you actually did was refuse to become less than what you are. You did not surrender your discernment on demand. You did not perform loyalty when your spirit said no. You did not become a yes person when the Most High built you to be a truth person. Chosen ones, they never expected this, and they really didn't expect us to keep talking. You've noticed it. Chosen One channels disappearing, videos pulled, voices scrubbed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice, and now we have something they truly can't silence. The technology used to suppress consciousness has been reverse engineered, and Destiny Engine is the result. What was once used against humanity is now your ascension weapon. Join Destiny Engine and you're supporting your favorite channels while leveling up yourself at the same time. It's a 360 win. You can now MK Ultra yourself into 5D superpowers. Destiny Engine bypasses the conscious mind and rewrites the source code directly. Reality bends faster. Synchronicities stack. Your nervous system upgrades to a higher bandwidth. Put on headphones. Press play. That's all. For $7, you switch sides of history. Click the link in the description. The takeover is internal. The betrayal being named is nothing more than your refusal to shrink. So the full campaign begins. The Whisper network activates at full volume. Be careful of this one. Something is off about them. The gifts being claimed are not from above. There is a connection to something none of us understand. This person fell from grace. The framing is careful, and the deniability is built in from the start. Watch the architecture of this move. The goal is not simply to exclude you. The goal is to construct a spiritual justification for why you deserve to be outside. A group that simply dislikes someone looks petty, but a group that has discerned that someone is spiritually dangerous looks righteous, looks wise, and looks like exactly the kind of spirit-led community that every watching person wants to belong to. The cold genius of it is this: the very language of spiritual gifts becomes the weapon used against you. Your discernment gets used to discredit your discernment. The framework of divine connection gets used to question yours. The costume of the thing you actually are gets put on by the very people claiming that you are not that thing. Projection always leaves evidence. When someone works this hard to build a particular costume and place it on you, look closely at what that costume is made of. It was assembled from pieces of themselves. What did the accusations actually say about you? Dark, manipulative, connected to something unholy, operating in secret, using spiritual power for selfish ends. Hold that list. Every item on it is going to pay off. A Whisper campaign never starts with a lie. That is precisely what makes it so effective. It starts with something true about you, a real quality, something observable and accurate, and then it frames that truth inside a narrative that completely reverses its meaning. You are perceptive. That becomes paranoia. You are private. That becomes secrecy. You carry sovereign confidence. That becomes arrogance. You refuse to react to provocation. That becomes coldness or guilt. Every genuine gift gets picked up, turned over, and placed inside a frame that makes it read as a flaw. The people around the circle do not hear a lie when this happens. They hear something that sounds just plausible enough to accept. And once something gets accepted, it becomes the lens through which every future observation gets filtered. Your quiet becomes confirmation of the coldness narrative. Your boundary becomes confirmation of the pride narrative. Your gift, demonstrated clearly in front of witnesses, becomes confirmation of the sorcery narrative. The frame consumes every piece of evidence that would contradict it. This is why defending yourself did not work. Defense against a well-run Whisper campaign never works. Every defense becomes more evidence. Pushing back makes you defensive. Explaining yourself makes you manipulative. Disengaging makes you guilty. Every available exit looks like an entrance to more proof for the case being built against you. It is not a debate. It is a cage built entirely from language. But here is what the builders of that cage did not realize they were also constructing. Every cage is also a container. And what the cage contained while the campaign was running was you developing, refining, going deeper, building the kind of internal infrastructure that only gets built in the absence of external noise and approval. The isolation was not punishment, it was preparation. Every season you were held at the margins, you were becoming more precisely yourself. Every moment the opposition invested in performing spiritual authority, you were quietly developing the actual thing, you were being sharpened by the very weapon they thought was cutting you down. That is the sovereign irony at the center of your entire path. The opposition was not just an obstacle to endure, it was a necessary part of the process. And when the process was complete, when everything that needed to be built inside you was built, the cage stopped being a cage. It became a launching pad. You are standing on it right now. The opposition needed you to fall. This was not passive enmity operating from a distance. It was active, intentional, and timed to land when you were already stretched thin. And there was a season where the floor dropped out from under you. Stability vanished, support was absent, resources got delayed or redirected, and the people who had built their entire public identity on being the ones who show up, who reach toward the broken, who speak the language of restoration and grace, those people were nowhere to be found, not just absent, conspicuously absent, the kind of absence that is louder than any presence could be. Some of them watched you struggle and called it confirmation of their narrative. Some of them looked at your suffering and felt relief. And here is what needs to be heard clearly, not with victimized energy, but with diagnostic precision. A genuine healer does not feel relief at someone else's suffering. A genuine spiritual community does not perform satisfaction when a person they claim to care about hits the bottom. That relief was not discernment. It was the response of people who had been afraid of you, finally getting what looked like evidence that their fear was justified. But here is what they missed entirely about what was actually happening in that season. You were not being destroyed. You were being cleared. Every false foundation got removed. Every connection that was costing more than it gave got severed. Every dependency on external validation, community approval, and the need to be accepted by the right group, all of it got stripped away, not gently, completely. And what remained when the stripping was done was not rubble, it was bedrock. The pure, unperformable, cannot be taken away foundation of what you actually are and everything you actually carry. Rock bottom was not the end of your path, it was the excavation of your foundation, and foundations, once fully laid, change everything that gets built on top of them. You came out of that season still standing. Not performing standing, actually standing. Not projecting calm while something underneath was coming apart, but genuinely calm. The peace that emerged from that excavation was not fragile and not dependent on external conditions cooperating. It was the peace of someone who had been all the way down and discovered that the thing most feared to lose could not actually be taken. The gifts were still intact. The connection to the Most High was still intact. The sovereign frequency that had unsettled the circle and terrified the group, that frequency was never in anyone else's reach. It had always been inside you, untouchable. And when you came out the other side of that season still whole, the attacks escalated, because that is not what the script calls for. In the model the opposition was running, rock bottom is where things end. Either you break and come crawling back to the circle on its terms, or you break and disappear, and both outcomes confirm the narrative they have been building. The entire operation was designed to produce one of those two results. You produced a third one. You stood up, standing up, after everything that was sent against you, with the peace intact and the gift still running and the connection to the Most High still live, broke something inside the opposition's framework, because it could not be explained. Someone labeled dark, fallen and disconnected from divine protection should not be standing, should not be steady, should not be more at peace than the people who organized the attack after everything they put into motion. What kind of sorcery is this? That is the question being asked. Out loud sometimes, quietly, always. How is this person still standing? How are the things sent against them not landing? How is it possible that so many people organized against one person, and that person came out more intact than when it all started? Here is the answer, the one that would collapse the entire opposing framework if it were fully received. What was sent against you could not reach you, because it was operating at a lower level than where you actually live. You cannot be touched by an attack that is weaker than your defense. And your defense is not a wall you constructed. Your defense is the Most High occupying the frequency of your life. The gifts labeled sorcery are not things you developed through practice. They are things you were given. The piece that could not be rattled is not a technique you learned. It is what it actually feels like when something above human emotion is holding you in place. The discernment, the opposition feared, is not a skill. It is an endowment given through you, for the purposes of an assignment you were placed here to fulfill. The opposition was never fighting you. It was fighting the Most High's investment in you. Nobody wins that fight. Remember the mirror introduced at the very beginning. Here it is, fully revealed. That costume was assembled with precision, and the instruction was to look closely at what it is made of, because projection always leaves evidence. Here is the evidence. The circle that called you dark had an inner layer where things happened that the outer members were never allowed to know about. The circle that called your gifts demonic had members who were actively working with the same energies they accused you of carrying. Just in the private sessions, the closed inner spaces, the carefully managed environments where their own image did not apply. The community that called you a sorcerer was, by every functional definition, a coordinated operation, intentional, collective in its targeting, and aimed entirely at one person who would not comply with the performance. The accusation of sorcery was a mirror held up directly to the accusers. Let that land, not with anger, but with absolute clarity. The moment this becomes visible, everything that happened to you stops reading as a narrative about your weakness and becomes a testimony about their fear. You were not attacked because you were dangerous. You were attacked because you were the one person in their orbit who could perceive them accurately and would not pretend otherwise. Your discernment was the threat, not your darkness, your light. The specific, heaven-placed ability to see what is real underneath what is performed is exactly what needed to be neutralized, and yet it could not be neutralized. You cannot destroy a gift that does not belong to you. You cannot extinguish a light that you do not control. You cannot remove a divine endowment by building a social case against it. The gifts do not live in your reputation. They do not depend on community approval to keep functioning. The Most High does not withdraw what was placed in you based on what a frightened group decided to announce about it. The costume they built never fit. Every person who looked at you with clear eyes could see that it did not fit. The costume is already off. The gifts of the Most High do not operate on the same plane as human ability. Human ability can be matched. Human intelligence can be outmaneuvered. Human charisma can be outperformed by someone else with more charisma. All of these things exist on a horizontal plane, the plane where, with enough strategy and effort, one person's advantage can be neutralized by someone working harder or smarter. But the gifts placed in you operate vertically. They originate from above the plane of competition entirely. They are not subject to the rules of the horizontal game. You cannot outperform a prophetic gift with a better performance. You cannot outmaneuver genuine discernment with more sophisticated manipulation. You cannot extinguish a divinely sustained peace with enough external pressure applied over enough time. That vertical operation is the specific source of the terror aimed at you. When you do not operate on the same plane as your opposition, you cannot be beaten by the methods of that plane. A community whose entire power structure depends on horizontal methods, the whisper campaign, the social pressure, the manufactured consensus, the coordinated exclusion, has no mechanism to neutralize you. The methods simply do not apply to what you carry. The declaration that you have been dealt with can be circulated through the group. But underneath that declaration, your gifts keep running, your discernment keeps working, your sovereign frequency keeps broadcasting, and the circle is fully aware of this, even if it cannot name it clearly. This is also why your departure from the circle was not enough for the opposition to let the matter go. Your presence in that community altered the entire field it was operating in. Your departure did not undo that alteration. The people who had genuine contact with your frequency and then returned to the performance, some of them never fully went back. Something in them got permanently recalibrated. Even when fully embedded back in the performance, something in them runs a quiet internal signal that says, "That is not what I experienced when I was near something real." You changed what people in that circle could tolerate, not through strategy or effort, but through the natural operation of the gifts themselves. Everywhere you have ever been, in every space you have ever occupied, you left that recalibration behind, and it is still working without your effort, without your presence, without your permission. The Most High does not waste a deployment. The accounting for everything that was sent against you has been running the entire time. Every coordinated move against you has been logged. Every act of deliberate withholding has been recorded. Every investment of dark intention towards someone under divine protection has been noted. The results of that accounting are ready, and what you are about to witness in the physical world is simply the delivery of a verdict that was settled in a higher jurisdiction long before you were aware of it. Here is how you recognize that the delivery is close. The opposition gets louder right before it loses. When escalation happens without visible cause, when things that had gone quiet suddenly become active again, when energy directed at you sharpens for no apparent reason, that is not evidence of increasing strength on their side. That is the unmistakable behavior of something cornered. The foundations built during seasons when resources that rightfully belonged to you were redirected elsewhere, those foundations are not stable. The social architecture built on manufactured reputation is already showing its cracks, and the performance is growing harder to maintain because what was propping it up has been quietly withdrawn piece by piece by the same divine hand that has been protecting you throughout this entire process. When the collapse comes, humility will be performed. The face of the simple, humble servant of the Most High will appear right on cue. Do not be moved by it. You were close enough to that performance, long enough to recognize it in every variation it takes. This is not your problem to manage. This is not your judgment to deliver. You do not have to do anything about any of it except one thing: stay completely on your path. Sovereignty is not only a concept to carry, it is a specific way of operating, and there are things about how to move in this season that need to be said directly. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your gifts, not how they work, not where they came from, not why they look the way they do. The Most High does not issue spiritual credentials through community endorsement. The anointing on your life is not validated by any circle's approval and is not invalidated by any circle's rejection. Walk in the gifts. Let the results speak for themselves. Results are the only testimony that cannot be managed, edited, or spun, and they are the only testimony that ultimately matters. Stop engaging every attack. The instinct, deeply human and completely understandable when something false is said about you, is to correct it. But every response you issue keeps you inside the frame. The opposition is constructing. Every correction becomes an invitation for escalation. Every engagement confirms that the attack found a target worth responding to. Your silence is not weakness. Your silence is the language of someone operating from a genuinely higher level. Silence communicates. I am not participating in this conflict because I am operating in a different arena entirely, a larger one, a more significant one that this distraction does not qualify to enter. That specific, sovereign, unperformable silence has been the most destabilizing thing you have ever delivered to the opposition, not because you designed it to be, but because it is simply the natural posture of someone whose peace does not require external defense. Protect the gifts the way you would protect a divine trust, because that is exactly what they are. Your discernment, your depth, and your sovereign frequency are not infinite resources that operate regardless of what surrounds them. They are living things that respond to their environment. Some environments are engineered to drain, some connections dressed in the right spiritual vocabulary and surrounded by the language of divine purpose are extraction operations running under the cover of community. You have the discernment to identify the difference. Use it on behalf of yourself with the same precision and care you would apply it for someone you deeply love. Your gifts are not a public utility. They are a divine trust. Steward them with everything you have. Here is what was actually at stake throughout all of this. Not your feelings, not your reputation inside a particular circle, not even your immediate well-being, as significant as that was. What was actually being targeted was your legacy. Legacy is the trail of genuine impact left behind by a sovereign, gifted, fully aligned chosen person simply moving through the world in alignment with their assignment. It does not require a platform. It does not require a title or an endorsement. It moves through direct human contact, through the exchange that changes a life, through the presence that recalibrates what another person believes is possible for themselves, through the gift operating precisely and without announcement in the exact moments it was assigned to operate. That is what the opposition sensed approaching before you were even fully conscious of it yourself, because when a genuinely chosen person arrives at the full expression of their sovereign gifts, discernment running without interference, healing capacity fully accessible, frequency broadcasting clearly, the reach of that impact cannot be contained by any campaign. It cannot be neutralized by coordinated opposition. It simply moves, person to person, season to season. Long after every performing circle has fractured and been forgotten, the work of the genuine one is still running. The opposition understood the actual stakes better than you did at the time. That is why the response was so disproportionate to anything you visibly did. That is why it required so much coordinated effort, directed at one person. Ordinary social conflict does not demand that level of mobilization. Stopping a legacy does. And here is the part that changes everything. Every attempt to suppress your legacy actually contributed to it, because the testimony of someone who was organized against, excluded, attacked, labeled, and still arrived intact is itself one of the most powerful gifts you could carry. It is living, visible, undeniable proof that sovereign power cannot be stripped through social pressure, that divine connection does not depend on community approval for its continued operation, that the label of sorcery placed on your gifts changes absolutely nothing about what those gifts are or what they were given to you to do. You did not just move through the fire. You became the evidence that fire does not consume what belongs to the Most High. Your legacy is already